Guitar technique fundamentals. How to fret the guitar. The fretting arm is responsible for any movement and stability of how the hand and fingers fret the guitar. Once the guitar is positioned correctly, the player bends the arm, and with their hand grabs the fretboard from underneath. Before addressing specific technique of the fretting fingers, the player must first understand how to position the fretting hand. Once the player has grabbed the fretboard, the thumb should rest behind the neck and the fingers over the fretboard. Curl all four fingers so the fingertips are pointing towards the fretboard. The first finger should be above the space between the nut and first fret of the guitar, establishing a fretting action in the first position. Before applying any fretted pressure on the fretboard, make sure the thumb is straight and is resting firmly behind the guitar neck and first finger. Now rotate the wrist so the palm is parallel with the guitar neck. Make sure all fingers are positioned roughly at an even level. This will allow equal preparedness for each finger to fret the guitar. Ensure that each finger is spaced apart sufficiently, as fingers that are pressed together is a result of excessive tension. This square hand position should be embraced as the correct fretting position for the guitar. New players may find this square hand position initially uncomfortable, but consideration to this position should always be established, till it feels more familiar. Not adopting a square hand position will cause the fingers to be uneven over the fretboard. Having uneven placement of fingers can delay the fretting action on specific frets and strings. This is especially the case for the fourth finger, being the weakest and least coordinated finger. A common mistake for new players to adopt by not rotating the wrist enough is allowing the fourth finger to move under the fretboard when the other fretted fingers are in action. The player therefore must consider controlling the level of tension used in the fingers, and be always aware on how the fourth finger reacts when the other fingers fret the guitar. Keep in mind some wrist rotation is allowed to accommodate fret and finger positioning toward particular chord structures that might require more than one finger to use the same fret. When considering the placement of the thumb behind the neck, it will be realized that it can have a direct influence on how the fingers fret the guitar. Once any finger frets the guitar, the thumb will need to simultaneously apply pressure behind the neck to assist with the finger placement. It is important for the player to understand that if the thumb does not remain behind the first and second fingers, maximum pressure with any fretting finger action is reduced, causing a greater likelihood of rattled notes. Therefore, the thumb should always be positioned behind the first and second fingers, regardless of what fret position is played. It will be obvious to the player how the thumb is positioned impacts the angle of the wrist. The player should always be aware of how the wrist and thumb are positioned when playing guitar. Both play an important role on how the fingers move and fret the guitar. Common mistakes players make when fretting the guitar is allowing the thumb come too high behind the neck. The player will notice that the higher the thumb moves behind the neck, the more the wrist bends inwards, which will result in weak fretting action. Players sometimes bring the thumb so high till it can reach over the neck and act as a fretted finger for the bass strings, considering that some guitars have a very narrow neck. This is caused by the thumb not moving with the fingers across the strings. Other fretting positions may cause players to drop the thumb too low. The player will realize that dropping the thumb too low will cause the wrist to bend outwards. Again, bending the wrist outwards too much is caused from the thumb not releasing pressure to move with the fretted fingers across the strings. The player must realize that the thumb and fingers should always work as one unit when fretting the guitar. This will help maintain a correct square hand positioning. Some fretting positions won't require much thumb movement, but other fretting positions will require the thumb to release all pressure completely to position itself in other areas of the guitar neck. This is the case when moving in higher positions of the fretboard. Another bad habit players adopt is not applying thumb pressure directly behind the first and second fingers. This mistake is usually done with a bent wrist and will cause excessive tension and weak finger pressure when fretting the guitar. The player must realize that keeping a straight wrist position will allow the fingers to fret the guitar with less tension. The thumb must always position itself to reflect a straight wrist. All joints of the thumb must be completely locked out, and should never bend to accommodate finger placement. The thumb should always remain behind and in line with the first and second fingers. This will allow the fingers to apply maximum pressure on the fretboard. When fretting the guitar with the fingers, it is important to observe how each finger is placed. The fretting action should be controlled with each joint of the finger bent and rigid. The fingers should use a quick pressing action at the very tip just before the fret. Ideally, the fingertips of the fretted fingers should be facing the fretboard at all times. The player should anticipate fret placement of the fingers so it's above the string ready for action. Fretting accuracy with the first finger is important as it allows better fret placement for the other fingers. If the first finger is not accurately placed near its fret position, all the other fingers will be out of position. Fingers too far from the frets will also need to unnecessarily extend more to fret the guitar accurately. This will cause the finger to lock out all joints, causing a weak fretting action. Playing too far from the frets will require more finger pressure to avoid any unwanted buzzing of notes. This can also cause the hand to develop excess tension in the fingers, affecting the way they fret the guitar. Some exceptions can be made with the accuracy of fret placement. Often chord structures on the guitar will require 2 or more fingers to play the same fret on different strings. This can impede a finger from being able to play exactly next to the fret. In this situation, the finger should play as close to the other finger blocking it. When applying finger pressure on the fretboard, ensure that the first joint of each finger do not collapse inwards. A collapsed finger will cause the pressing action to lose pressure, leading to unwanted buzzing. A collapsed finger can be caused by an incorrect wrist position, poor fingertip placement, or having nails too long on the fretting hand. It is important for new players to develop calluses on the fingertips. This will allow for greater pressure and rigidness with the fingers. However, there are some exceptions to collapsed fingers. Depending on the context of the music played, it may be a suitable option to collapse a finger to cover more than one string. This rule only applies when more than one string needs to be fretted. At no instance should collapsing a finger apply to fretting a single string. Once the player has developed an understanding of the principles discussed so far, the player must be aware of how the elbow of the fretting arm moves. This is especially the case when specific chord structures are played. Particular chord structures might require the player to fret the guitar with the fourth finger, on a lower string than the other fingers. This will not only require the player to adopt a square hand position, but it also may require the player to bring the elbow close to the body. This will give the fingers more leverage. Likewise, if the first finger is positioned on a lower string from the other fingers, a square position must also be adopted, and the player may be required to direct the elbow outwards instead. I hope you liked this video on how to fret the guitar. Please feel free to comment and subscribe to get more videos on guitar technique fundamentals by Guitargusto.